So today we've got a number of different slides that we'll run through to back up the presentation. And if you want, you can actually get a copy of these slides just by typing away in the chat box your email address, and then we can pop them over to you after the presentation is finished. Okay, so before we get into the body of the information all around successfully implementing change, I'd just like to have an acknowledgement of country. So this is something that I like to do to kick off my sessions, and I'm going to try my best to do this in language. So if there are any Noongar speakers tuning in today, feel free to send me some corrections. I'm very much somebody here with my L plates on at the moment, so I'm going to give it my best shot. So, Gala Kadich Nicha Buja Wajuk Nunga Buja Bal Demam Debam Kurayeye Border Kirayu. Cool. We know and understand this is Wajuk Nunga country of their grandmothers and grandfathers, past, present, and those rising up. Gala Kadich Nala Nil Bal Border Kul Bal Kadajini Bal Genuini Nicha Buja Kumba. We know and we listen to the future journey of their knowledge and how they will continue to look over their many countries and lands. Okay, so a little bit about myself and how I've ended up on the other side of a screen to you today. So I've been running my own successful small business for nearly 8 years now, mainly focusing around the people and culture space with HR consulting. So the sorts of things that I do is I'll speak at conferences and events as a keynote speaker. I'll facilitate workshops and training delivery, which as of this year has mostly been online in webinar forums such as this. I conduct HR health checks for organisations just to check in and see if there's any areas that may need some attention to help mitigate risk or boost productivity, boost engagement, boost overall performance of organisations. I also help with people performance, and that can be also tackling difficult issues such as where there's any poor performance in place. I help people with their people technology, so this might be around queries for payroll systems or HR systems in place, and they used to be quite out of reach for a small business owner, whereas nowadays the cost of technology has really come down over the past decade. Cloud computing and a lot of competition on the market has brought some awesome products out nowadays. I help organisations with their people strategy, so perhaps if there's a period of growth anticipated, how to ramp up for that growth, or in a period of decline, which unfortunately I've helped some organisations through this year, how to manage that well with people to be able to enable businesses to operate sustainably. And also work a little bit around the wellness at work. I'm a trained yoga teacher, so every now and again I do sprinkle a little bit of yoga into our sessions just to help keep everybody at their best energy level to absorb all of that information. So today, the agenda that we've got for this 1 hour webinar is looking at change. So understanding that impact of change on others, looking at how you personally can deal with change. And of course, this year's been an interesting one for how we actually cope with change as a business owner, as a leader within our business, to be able to make that journey as painless as possible for our people. Because of course, by unencumbering our people, that helps them perform at their best in their roles. We're going to have a look at some concepts around change, and also have a look at the AdCar model, which is what's actually followed on the handout that I sent through, and have a little bit of a look at some key tips and guidance on leading others through change. And as I mentioned, if there are any questions at any time, then please feel free to pop them into the chat box. Okay then, so working on through our session, and I'll just see we do have a quick note in the chat box up there. So thanks so much, Christina. We'll definitely make sure we get a copy of this presentation out to you shortly. Okay then, so looking at the session as we work through today, the sorts of outcomes that you can expect by attending this webinar are things like understanding where you are in a change cycle, having a look at what sort of emotional responses you might expect during change. And the great thing about these workshops is sometimes I do get people go, oh yeah, well, I kind of know this stuff. But sometimes it's just about creating this space. And that's why it's great you're here today. You've created the space to actually have some time to reflect and work on your business instead of working in your business. And this year's been an interesting one. So I actually took some time to work on my business last month. I did a business health check, which is something that you can actually do. You can do a whole needs analysis through the one-on-one advisory sessions through ASBAS. And I spend all my time working on other people's business, and it clearly showed in the results that I hadn't spent enough time looking at mine and looking at my strategy. I had a strategy a few years ago, but it needed a good update. So it's great that you're taking some space today, and perhaps this can be part of you creating even more space to work on your business into the future. There's some interesting ways to diagnose where change can be failing, and so the handout will also help with that. And it'll also help with putting in place some actions to address change issues. Okay, so looking at change, it's really interesting to see how much of it actually fails. And so there's been some interesting global research by a big organization called McKinsey. They do a lot of management consulting stuff. So they've actually found that 70% of change programs fail to achieve their goals. And one of the biggest elements behind it is employee resistance. So that's part of the reason why me as a HR practitioner am here today, because it's all about looking at overcoming that major blocker to successful change. And the sorts of things that can really help boost your success in a change program are things like clear communication, making sure those goals are visible and people understand what they need to do as part of that process. And that can actually boost success rates by 25%. So that's quite a considerable increase there by having that focus right from the start. Okay, and another little bit of interesting inspiration for you is from good old Charles Darwin there, that talks about not necessarily being the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent. It's actually the one that is most adaptable to change. And this year, when I first started presenting this COVID-19 series, it was around about end of March, early April time, and we were seeing some really interesting businesses pivoting to new areas or pivoting to new methods of service delivery. Business Station itself had to pivot to a different method of service delivery. From having majority of face-to-face services, we had to look online. From having specific elements of delivery, we were able to offer general business services and advisory out to people in the community. And we saw people in the community doing amazing things, cafes going from in-house catering to people who are sat in on their premises to actually doing a lot more around the takeaway space. There were places like wineries and distilleries that were actually using their product rather than for alcohol, but for the alcohol content and actually producing hand sanitizer. So it's amazing how businesses were able to pivot and survive. And so having that adaptability built in is a really great strength. And this is one of the reasons that I really love small business, because often being small can mean that you're agile and you can switch and you can shift a lot easier than other huge organizations that have got all of this infrastructure and buildings and things that are all there that are very difficult to change and very costly to change too. Now, often people think that project management is all about managing a successful change, but the project management is more around looking at the planning side of things from a what needs to happen and when does it need to happen. So you see those lovely Gantt charts mapping out those milestones. And that's great. And that is something that is important for success. But today we're looking at the other element, the people element. We're looking at change management. And that's very much about how. How can you engage the hearts and minds? And even if you're running quite a small business here and now, then you may have other people that are connected. Perhaps you have family members that may help out. Maybe your partner helps out with things, or maybe you've actually got a whole suite of subcontractors that you use. I personally use quite a few subcontractors in my business from time to time to deal with peaks in workload, which I know are going to be temporary. And so being able to help people through that change who are not necessarily employees is also a good place to start. So as I mentioned, your project management is very much about your planning side of things. And this is all about making sure that you monitor and control what's been done and when it's been done. And you're focusing on moving to that closeout position on your project. Whereas change management is about preparing from a change from a people perspective, and then checking in with those people and then reinforcing that change. Time and time again in my career, up until I started my business, I saw changes fail in large organisations. And often it could be things like perhaps there was a new system coming in and people might try it for a few weeks, and the project management team would say, yes, I've ticked the box, we've implemented this, it's all fine. Whereas the change management people knew that actually implementing the change is much longer than just that end milestone of go live on a system. Because people in organisations can resist change, and sometimes they've got good reason to as well, which is why it's good to engage people early along and get them on board and allow them to challenge a process up front at an early stage rather than resisting at the end. So one example was a change project where there was a new technology that had been put in place, which was actually less efficient than the old system. And so people would just find workarounds to get their way back into the old system and continue working through from there. And I mentioned the AdCar model earlier, and that is a model that was actually brought out by an organisation called ProSci, and they have some awesome materials around change that I found to be really useful over the years. And they've got this fantastic quote where having excellent project management, having an awesome vision, having the best solution to a problem doesn't necessarily result in successful change. And I mean, I've seen it out there time and time again where sometimes you'll have a product that's first to market. It won't quite make it, but it's a competitor that is second to market. So they might not have had the best vision. They might have just been trying to keep up with their competitors. They've actually won the market share. So the secret to successful change is really rooted in something much simpler. So it's all about facilitating that change with one person. So one example was a beverage product in the UK that was brought out by a large beverage company, but they hadn't really understood the people that they were actually wanting to get on board, and understood that those people had to make a switch. They were already consuming one type of beverage. This was a new type, and getting that level of understanding just took a while to gain traction. And another organisation with a competing product that came out later in the market actually managed to grab the market. They understood the customers, they understood the problem that they were looking to solve as part of this process. And that product, that actual situation happened about 20 years ago. And the product that won out is still there, is still available in restaurants and bars today, whereas the other one, the first to market, actually got phased out back around about 15 years ago. So looking at your change project, it's really good to understand the full nature of the change. And so with that, it's not just that, oh, we're going to have a new technology, oh, we're going to offer a new service, oh, we're going to have a different product out there in the marketplace. Because it's about understanding those touch points of what that impact will be for people within the process. And then by understanding it at that deeper level, you can actually start having a look at what might be likely to occur. And this then helps to provide some reassurance to people. So your key stakeholders, your employees, your subcontractors, or any other key parties, if they understand what's likely to be happening, then they'll feel reassured that there's some predictability in this. And this year has been one of those years where there's been a lot of unpredictability. So your ability as a leader within your business to provide some level of certainty and predictability is something that it can create immeasurable good within an organisation and within the well-being of your team. And this year, those feelings around a lack of control have actually contributed to quite a bit of anxiety around people. And so having people in a good place for change is also good. If there's already people that are already quite stressed out, then helping them to explore that and get support for that is actually a good thing to do, so that people feel ready to tackle any kind of change coming up. And there's a lot of free support services out there. So you've got all sorts from Beyond Blue, you've got Lifeline, and there's also one in Western Australia called Helping Minds, and they're providing a free EAP service or counselling service to people across the state at the moment. So worth tapping into that and communicating that out to your teams too. So having a plan actually is a great way of counteracting what anxiety may be there. And with this plan, it isn't just about having your milestones on your Gantt chart saying what needs to be done by what date from a project management perspective, but your change management plan looks at the emotional and physical upheaval for people. So if you are there and you have, let's say, a warehouse depot in a certain location, but you've actually found a really awesome deal at another one, but it's about 15 k's away. It's a newer facility, it's also cheaper, it's got better space in there that's more suitable for your needs. And even though all of these things are going to be real positives for your business, there's some upheaval for people. There will be people who may have to travel further to work. They'll have to go and figure out new routes. If they're driving a truck to and from that premises, they'll have to figure out how to get around the traffic flow in the best possible way so they can have their most efficient journeys and all sorts of other things. So going from the routine every day, which doesn't take up much headspace, they're going to have to think more about those everyday tasks. And that takes up a lot of brain power. There was a really interesting interview actually with Barack Obama when he was around the end of his presidency, where he actually confessed that one thing that he did every day to reduce that decision fatigue is actually to wear the same colour suit every day, because he knew if he wore the same grey suit, his ties would all match that suit, everything was all done every day, and it was one less thing he had to think about in the morning. And so when there's a change process going on, yourself as a leader, sometimes it's good to make sure that you're lowering your cognitive load. What can you do so there's less things to think about in a period of change? So if you're planning on moving your business premises, try not to be moving house at the same time or going through any other large life events. Another thing that you can do is with change, we often think of it as being this big bad thing that will have an impact on our life. It's easy to go, oh my gosh, the sky is falling in, this is going to have a major impact on my life. So to counteract this with your people, when you start communicating about the change that is planned, or even if you've got a change underway, it's not too late to actually have some discussions and conversations about the change. And it's good to shrink that change down. So being very specific on, we are going to, let's say, move our business premises here. We're going to still operate with the same fleet of vehicles. We are still going to use the same computer system. We are going to make this move on a Sunday, and we're going to have lots of external support so that we're ready to go on the Monday. We are going to put in place a good communication out to our network so that anybody who has to visit our site is made aware 3 weeks before, and a reminder the week before perhaps that things are transitioning over so that you don't have to deal with many queries as employees. So it's good to have that amount of specifics out there. It's good to help when you shrink that change, you make that change so much easier to achieve for people. So it's like, oh, right, so everything's staying the same. So my job title stays the same, my duties stay the same, my desk even stays the same. the only thing that's changing is I just have to drive to a different workplace. But it's still relatively close to home, and for some people their journey to work may be even better than before. Now, it's good to start off with a small investment from people. And so in that, you're not asking for them to make huge changes within a change process. So if, for example, you were looking to implement a new system in your organization, perhaps it's a whole system that covers your finance, your CRM, so your customer relationship management. It might cover your HR piece, all sorts of things. But perhaps you just roll out one system first of all and gain some confidence in that system works really well. And people go, oh, wow, this is really helpful. I actually have all the answers right there in front of me every time somebody wants to have some further information from me. And that positive word and positive momentum can spread. And then once you've built that success and that confidence, that's where you can move on to the next phase of the project and actually say, look, you've adapted to this really well. Build that confidence. And you can also use this as an opportunity for building pride in your organisation. So this is how we have gone from a small local business to be doing things that the big national players are doing. And so giving that pride that people are in a winning workplace that is really thriving and doing well. It's great to highlight the bright spots. So where you do have some successes that are working out really well, be it a system change or a process change or a product change, then highlight that out for people. If, for example, you've got a cafe, you've changed the menu, you've got, oh, the catering, you know, all of the people in the kitchen are going, oh my gosh, we've got to learn new recipes, and the staff front of house are going, oh, well, we've got to learn, okay, which ones are gluten-free, what other things do we need to know, or do we have vegan options here? I used to know this menu off by heart and now I don't remember anything. But highlighting the bright spots, the successes that people have, the tips and tricks and tools people have, share them around. And so if people are finding a good way of doing things, then that's good to be shared amongst the team. And then you can actually really rally the herd. So when you do hit some key milestones, it's good to celebrate that success. And if the milestones are too distant, look for inch pebbles. So that's actually a quote from a guy called Fred Heath. There's a couple of guys in America called Chip and Dan Heath, and they did this wonderful book all about change, and it's called Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard. And so if you're in a big project that is going to take some time, and it perhaps has some challenges, it's all about not necessarily waiting for a big win. It's all about celebrating the little wins. Now, I moved to Western Australia back in 2007 as part of, I was recruited by IKEA as part of their move, and from their very small store in Osborne Park to the big store in Innaloo. And that is a huge project to relocate a whole store, to also fill the whole store with product, get it all shipped in from its various international locations, with shipping times and long lead times on some products. Some sofas would take 28 weeks from order to delivery into store. So lots of interesting planning there. Also hiring enough people for the store at the height of the mining boom to all sorts of challenges. And so if we were just looking at store opening as being our only celebration point, then it might have been a bit much because it was such a humongous project. So there were lots of little celebrations in between of, okay, well, you know, you had the old silver shovels out when you break ground for the first time, ready to start construction. As there were new construction milestones met, then there'd be celebrations there. And of course, when we got to the end of the first week of trading in the new store, there was a massive party then. So it's definitely good to have some celebrations along the way. It's a great way to say thank you to your team also. And this is an interesting quote too, and one that alludes to the fact that you really need to look at embracing the totality of the change, provided it's right for your organisation. And so if you are looking at making a genuine shift, if you are looking at moving into a new market, perhaps attracting a different type of customers, you can't play basketball by adopting a few rules of the game. You can't just go, okay, well, we've just got to chuck this ball in a hoop and that'll do. There's a lot more to it than that. And it's the same for having a pivot within your business. So if you are looking at a different market, then okay, what are those different clients looking for? Put yourself in those shoes. Don't just put an advert, change your Facebook advertising, for example, to try and pick up a different demographic, perhaps, for using your services. That's not going to be enough. The whole language you use has to be authentic and real. Looking at how these people would engage with those types of services. Or if you're breaking new ground in a completely new area, how can you transition people over? How can you limit that fear of trying something new and different? Now, a great way to look at change is also around how you communicate it out. And so measuring a change project can be really useful. And with that, it could be down to, if you've got a tech change project, then measuring the implementation. So people might go, oh, wow, well, getting this new accounting software is a really massive change. So how can you shrink that down? Well, you can say, well, we've already got the hardware for it. We've got computers. We've got a reasonably reliable internet connection. That means that we can tap into cloud computing. Our finance team understand how to do accounts. They're also really well skilled with using online platforms. They understand how to use Mile, perhaps, or Xero, or whatever the QuickBooks, whatever the existing software is. And we're going to be transferring to a new large-scale software now as we continue to grow our business operations. So people understand that. People know how to log into a computer, how to log onto a system, how to create secure passwords. They understand how to reconcile their bank accounts, all of these things. So actually, we're starting this change project and we're already a good way there in terms of moving towards completion. And so your team is pretty close before they've even started to have their first foray onto a new system. So when we looked at the McKinsey stats at the beginning of the presentation, with 70% of change processes failing, one part of this also comes from the fact that each change starts with a loss. There's always something that somebody has to let go of. And looking back to that time when I was with IKEA, where we moved from the small leaky shed that we were in Scarborough Beach Road there in Osborne Park, to our brand new, all singing, amazing store in Innaloo, there were people that weren't happy with that change. Even though in the old store, the aircon was so bad, we would have to hand out iced water to customers on a hot day so that people wouldn't faint while they were walking around store. We'd have to run around with buckets every time it would rain because there were so many leaks in the roof in that store. But people loved it. They had a sense of community that when you spread your workforce across a much bigger site, there was that sense of loss there. Even despite the amazing new co-worker facilities, a wonderful big restaurant, the fact that there was air conditioning that actually worked, so they wouldn't have to bring 3 shirts to work every day, so they still looked presentable all through the day and didn't look like a sweaty mess. So there's always a sense of loss. And so acknowledging that early on is a good thing to do. So William Bridges is another person who's done quite a bit of research in this area. And he talks about the fact that it's not the change itself that people are reacting to, but it's that letting go. So perhaps now is a good time to actually have a think about a change that you're leading or a change that perhaps you're planning, and think about who is it going to impact? And also, what are those people going to need to let go of during that process? So if you'd like to take a moment to reflect on that and perhaps tap your responses into the chat box there, I'd love to hear. And if you are in a situation where perhaps you don't have a change project on go at the moment and you're still figuring out, that's okay. But it is good to start off by having a think about those stakeholders. Who is it going to impact? What will they need to let go of? And then that can help you put in really effective strategies to counteract those sorts of issues there. Now, as a leader within a change project, you are somebody who will need to be very aware of your own transition, and with that, having a think about what you feel. So if you are relocating to a new premises, is this something that you really embrace, or is there something that you need to also deal with as part of this process? Because your team are taking their cues from you. They're looking at your behaviours, they are looking at your reactions and your responses. This is something that is really important if you've got a management structure in your business. So if you're the business owner and you have leaders within your business who are going to be potentially deploying that message out to the team, it's really good to make sure that they're fully on board, so that they don't go, well, I think this project is a load of crap, but my boss has told me to do it, so I guess we've just got to get on with it. That's not a way to engage those hearts and minds. So having some really honest conversations and doing what you can to create a real culture of trust within your business will help you be in the best possible position. The sorts of things that I've heard many a time within organisations, unfortunately, are comments like this. So this project is a waste of time. It was working just fine before. They never tell us what's going on. So those are symptoms within a project that there are problems, but it doesn't have to be a major stumbling block for your project. In fact, sometimes it can be embraced, because by embracing that resistance and understanding where that resistance comes from, you can actually help your change become even more effective. So often within organisations, employees are not necessarily opposed to the change itself, even though their language might reflect that sometimes. But it may be that nobody has actually made a clear and compelling case as to why the change was needed. So going back to that example, if your manager goes, well, I think this project's a load of rubbish, but the boss has told me to do it. It's not clear, it's not compelling. Whereas to make successful change really happen in your workplace, it's all about following 5 key steps. So this is where you bring in your awareness, raising the awareness for the need to change in the organisation. And within that, uncovering a level of desire to change. That could be by uncovering frustrations with the current status quo. If you're moving your depot from one location to another, perhaps the existing one hasn't got enough room for the trucks to manoeuvre around, it's quite awkward. Perhaps you've run out of office space, people are all crammed into a tiny space, and perhaps the facilities are a little bit old and not particularly well maintained, so it's not a nice environment to be in. Perhaps your customers actually don't really like visiting your premises because it looks a bit old and shabby. So there may be some inherent desire that you can uncover as you work with your employees. Knowledge is all about going, okay, well, awareness is all about, okay, so maybe we need to change. Desire is all about, yeah, okay, this change would be good because we can do all of these things. Knowledge is all about taking that next step forward around what that may look like. Ability is, how do you change? Okay, well, for us to start operating from this new premises, we need to get it all set up. We need to make sure that we have all of the IT systems all able to operate from this premises. It's all connected up with the electricity. We've got our Wi-Fi all set up in there, and so on and so forth. And then reinforcement. Thankfully, with something like a location change, you're not going to get many people that are ever going to insist in continuing to go to the old place of work where it no longer is the old place of work. Whereas for other more subtle changes, such as a process change or a system change, sometimes old habits die hard. So it's good to look at opportunities to reinforce. It's also good to look at the underpinning elements, so those phases that map almost into your project management side of things. So when you're building up that, establishing that business need, that's where you're building your awareness across the organisation. So it isn't a surprise, we're doing this change. Bring people in as early as you can. And then they can actually help with that concept and design stage. And that will help boost your success at implementation. But also that post-implementation is so important. And the handout we've got actually addresses a lot of those points on that particular slide. And we'll take a few moments at the end to go through that handout so that you can see how you might be able to apply it to changes in your business, big or small. In terms of looking at what's in it for you or what's in it for the actual employee, it's good to understand where resistance might be coming from. Perhaps there's somebody who instantly springs to mind in your workforce who naturally tries to resist almost everything that you try and do. There's usually one in a workforce or maybe a couple of people. And so understanding that reason for resistance is important, and then translating the change into that personal context. So if they can bring up some valid reasons for resisting the change, then you can actually start to uncover what can be done to address those concerns. And in terms of assessing the change, this is where you can interact in all sorts of ways with people. So at the start of the project is checking in with people. You might have interviews or surveys or focus groups just to understand around the impact of that change. In terms of looking at when the change will be impacting within an organisation, it's good to actually talk to people around the planned project commencement, what the key milestones are, when they occur, and when completion is likely. And resistance can come from all sorts of different places. So it may be that your team are already at full stretch, they're already at capacity, so they might not have the time to be able to focus on something changing. They might not be able to prioritise it. So working with people to help create that space, that time, to be able to reprioritise too is important. Resistance comes from habits. People like to do that same thing every day. Resistance may come from intellectual or physical limitations, so it may require things that are beyond a person to actually do, and so there may be some workarounds that are actually required to enable that person to continue working. There may be psychological blocks, and this was something that was quite common several years ago. We went through that period of time where there was a big segmentation with your white-collar workforce working on computers and your blue-collar workforce not working on computers, whereas now it's starting to shift. But there are some people that have that psychological block of, oh my gosh, I'm terrible with technology. I'm going to break it if I touch it. If I have to tap things into an iPad or a tablet or something like that, I'm too scared that it's all going to go wrong and I won't know how to fix it. And a lot of that is around confidence rather than actual ability. So looking at ways to remove those psychological blocks, and of course doing so in conversation with your teams. Availability of resources is another key one. So people might feel that, okay, this new computer system is great, but there aren't enough tools to go around, tools of the trade. It could be that people need to put reporting information and on work that they've completed into your system, but there's not enough kiosks for people to do that. And so addressing those sorts of things is always important. Now, there are some don'ts for change management. So things to look out for include making sure that you don't just assume that people understand the changes. You need to check in because as soon as you assume things, that's where the problems can start arising. It's important not to just brush aside people's concerns because they will likely be coming from a genuine place of concern and validity. And so with that, engage in people's concerns, understand them, because they may actually be able to highlight issues that hadn't been foreseen before. It's important not to talk over people when they're trying to talk to you so that you can actually help make those people in your teams or other important stakeholders feel like you value their views. And it's important not to make cynical, negative, judgmental comments around the change or individuals. And that applies not just when you're face to face with the individuals, but it can also apply when you're speaking to others. So if you're having a team meeting with your key managers and somebody hasn't turned up yet, making any sort of negative comments about them, saying, oh, well, I knew they wouldn't turn up, they hate this project anyway, things like that, is not going to be conducive to success in the project, because the people in the room will go, oh, wow, that's a bit of an interesting view. Yeah, we're disappointed with how this person's behaving, but your leaders of the organisation ultimately should be leading by example. Other don'ts. It's important not to make promises you can't keep. So if you promise that they're going to have this amazing system that's going to change their lives, make everything much easier, and they're going to have it by the end of January, if it's not going to do that and it's not going to be in by the end of January, please don't promise those things, because it's a way of eroding trust. And then next time you make promises around a project, people will be going, well, really? And you're likely to encounter a lot more cynicism and resistance. It's important to make sure that you're not expecting people to embrace change without good reason. And people can embrace all sorts of change. So earlier this year, for a number of my clients, we were actually having to renegotiate contracts with employees. We were often asking people to take pay cuts of anything up to 60%. And so asking people to embrace that sort of change is a pretty big ask. But when you manage the people piece and when you manage the change management piece effectively, when you have carefully communicated and helped people understand that real burning need for that change and what the outcome may be if the change isn't made, then that's where you can really bring people on board. And through that process, every single employee who was who needed to make a change, who was being asked to make a change, every single one of my clients signed up for significant salary drops, significant hour drops, just to make sure that there was job security across the workforce, and to also ensure that the organisations that they work for were able to continue operating. Because for those organisations to continue trading, paying wages at that level, it was unsustainable and actually would have led to insolvency within a reasonably short period of time. Because for a lot of organisation, when WA lockdown hit, and when lockdown hit in a lot of areas, that tap with the money, that revenue tap, was very firmly switched off for a period, causing some big impacts there. And it's really important to plan your communication strategy of who you're going to talk to and when. And so that's where mapping out your stakeholders at the start really helps to keep things moving positively. Now, there are some do's, some top tips are: please listen to people. Please trust people with information, because they'll feel important, they'll feel special, they'll feel proud if you can trust them at an early stage. It's important to consult and gather those ideas and communicating with people in simple, clear language. You may have people who have English as a foreign language, as a second language. You may have people who have dyslexia. You may have other people who may be very smart individuals, but have lower levels of literacy because of various different factors in their lives. And so being clear and simple in your communication helps get that impactful message across and avoid confusion. It's important that people understand the reason behind the change, give them their why, and giving people updates. And even if there's nothing to tell, please tell people. I once managed a significant redundancy program where people were told in April that they were being made redundant, and a lot of them were being expected to work all the way through till November. And during that time, you can imagine people's motivation to do a good job could have been heavily impacted. But by regularly communicating with people, even when there was nothing to tell around their updated leaving dates of the organisation, even if there's nothing to tell about supports available, we would meet people and we would let them know that there's progress being made, but there's no firm outcomes. Because gossip always thrives in a vacuum. People will still communicate, but it won't be your message. You will lose control of that messaging around change even if you don't actually go out there and let people know that there's no more information. It's good to minimise surprises for people. So if there are issues, be honest and upfront from an early stage. It's good to show respect for the past, because nobody wants to see individuals making and repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And it's good to develop that reputation for knowing and imparting those facts to your team so they feel like they can trust the information that comes to you. It's great to give people lots of opportunities to ask questions. And that doesn't necessarily mean lots of meetings where you bring everybody together, but also maybe if you've got quite a few employees, you might set up a special email address that people can pop their change-related specific questions to. Or perhaps you've got another online messaging platform where, if you've got Microsoft Teams, for example, you may have a special Teams channel where people can actually ask questions about the team, about the change, and everybody across the team can actually see the responses as they come through. It's good to acknowledge difficulties that the project or people may be facing and actually invite that resistance out in the open. If you have someone who often criticizes what's going on, ask them their views in a public forum, public way, so you can show that you have nothing to hide. It's important to also be your best when you're presenting and change, and encourage your managers to also do your best. So this may be that you actually take your managers through the process, first of all, of what the change may be and get their views so they can deal with it and process it. And you can take on board any negative reactions at that stage and talk through any resistance early on. If you are a manager and you actually feel some resistance to an existing change process, please speak to your manager so you can understand it. There may be something going on that you don't agree with, but there's bound to be some logic behind it. And once you uncover that logic and you get that deeper level of understanding, it can help you on your journey. It's good to seek some support from your peers. If you are the most senior person in your organisation, if you are the business owner, perhaps there's somebody else. This is where it's great to attend little networking events where you can connect with others. There may be somebody else in the industry that you can connect up with, or someone else who operates a small business in the area who's got a complementary business perhaps that you can bounce some ideas off. And it's good to become aware of your own stress levels. So there may be stress reducing techniques that you can bring into your life. And you might like to have a think about this. If we had a bit more time today, this would be a great opportunity to share some, because you may have some valuable stress reducing techniques that others may well benefit from. The sorts of things that are widely regarded as being great stress relievers are spending some time out in nature. So that could be simple things like, now we've got some nice sunny weather coming back again, just having breakfast in your backyard, or perhaps in the evening, having some time out in your backyard. Going for a walk. Is there somewhere where you can go for a walk on your lunch break where you can actually be there with trees around, with nature around? And within that, exercise is a great one. Is walking your thing, or is it running or cycling or even kayaking or whatever that might be? How can you incorporate that into your daily routine, even when things get busy? There's also things like yoga, meditation. So many business owners actually find that they are able to be more focused within their day if they meditate. And there's huge numbers of free apps out there that can help you on that meditation journey. And you can do that for maybe 5-10 minutes. And it's really effective to do first thing in the morning. So perhaps before you even get out of bed, you pop on your headphones, you listen to your 10-minute meditation track and see how your day goes from there. It's much easier to keep a cool, calm head if you're in a good space at the start of the day. Okay, so it's a great time to share some questions. So if you do have some questions, please pop them up in the chat box there, and I'd be happy to share the answers with you. So thank you so much for tuning in, and while you are tapping away any questions in the chat box, I'd just like to also let you know that the information provided here is very general in nature, and of course there are other parties available out there for more specific information. So if you needed specific financial information around tax implications of a change project, that's where you go and see an accountant. Or if there's legalities around certain elements of a change project, perhaps patents and things, that might be where you see a lawyer, for example. But there's also heaps of other good sources out there. There's a lot of different advisors available through ASBAS you can tap into, and also the Small Business Development Corporation has got a lot of support, even for things like leases and things. So that's really quite helpful there. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment and also share the other screen that I have open, which has actually got the little tool here. So hopefully you can see. I think you may still have my presentation. I'll just stop that one a moment and bring up the handout. Okay then. Right, try again, take two. So I will now, hopefully, yes, that looks much better here. Wonderful. Okay then, so we can see here, this handout is a great opportunity for you to map out your change. So you may have your proposed change of a new product, perhaps you're targeting a new group of clients. And so then look at the stakeholder groups. And this change readiness form can actually be used for lots of different stakeholder groups. So it may be your employees, it may be your key suppliers. You may have one, and maybe you've got different key suppliers. So if you're running a transportation business of some sort, and then you've got, and you're looking to change location, perhaps you're going to increase your fleet at the same time. Then you've got your suppliers of your fleet, you've got your people who service your trucks, you've got your employees, you've got any clients that might visit the premises, all sorts of other people. So it's good to map this out for different stakeholder groups. So it's important to map out why you think that change is necessary. With that, really sort of keep asking why to yourself. If you ask why to things 5 times, you generally tend to get the true answer and the true essence of what you're looking for. And the desire. So this is where you can uncover any resistance or potential resistance early on and understand what may be a factor that may cause resistance and what are the benefits to people. So you can really acknowledge that resistance with that group. So look, I know it might be difficult moving to a different location, but this location will help us provide a much better service. It's actually got much better docks for the trucks to pull up to, or whatever it might be, that will enable things to be better for that stakeholder group. The knowledge, so what sort of knowledge and skills are needed and what is there right now within that stakeholder group. The ability to change, have a look at those barriers, and by doing this early on, you can find ways to address those barriers and perhaps consult with people around how to address those barriers. And then reinforcement, what sort of things are in place to help make change stick? And so sometimes reinforcement can be quite a heavy one. So for example, with a system change, you might go, well, the system's switching off at this stage, and so you just can't use it anymore. So that's a pretty solid one, but there may be other elements. Perhaps there are financial incentives, bonuses, for example, available to people during the change. And then on the other side here, you can see the ranking, if you rank them 1 to 5 on the side in terms of 1 being high, low and 5 being high. So is the awareness really high? Yes, 5 perhaps on awareness, but perhaps a lot of people know about the change, but the desire to change might not be there. And so by mapping this out, you can pop it into the table here. You just put an X in the box where things are right now, and then you can actually identify which areas would be your primary focus. So anything in here with a score below 3, so your awareness, desire and knowledge, those are ones that you'd actually start to focus on within your change project. So we need to do some more raising of awareness amongst our key stakeholders. Perhaps employees know the change, but our external parties, our subcontractors don't know, our main suppliers don't know. And then you may need to look at what's next in terms of a low score within your organisation. And this provides an awesome time-tested and proven way of tackling change to enable the best possible results. So hopefully you received that through all okay on the email, and if you didn't, feel free to pop me a note and I'd be more than happy to help there. And I'm making this recording available, so that will come through Business Station, and also the actual presentation slides itself, so that you've got all of the information on all those interesting stats. And if you do have any other questions, or perhaps if you're going through a change project now and you want more detailed and bespoke guidance, then please let me know. You can actually book in a session via the Business Station website, and we can work together to help your change project be a success. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been wonderful to spend this hour with you this morning, and I'd like to wish you all the very best with your change project now and into the future. Thank you.